All right, Super Stories family. I am really excited to have this conversation with Jordan Grainger because I feel like I know her already and I don't, which is the odd world we live in with TikTok. But Jordan, thank you so much for joining us on the Sober Stories podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Um it's been a crazy journey, and it's really fun to be able to share my story with other people in the hopes that other people, resonate with it.
Yeah, and that is what we're all about. We're about sharing stories that are different because there are 1,000 different ways to do this and 1,000 different ways to change your relationship with alcohol. And we're used to just hearing one. So I'm really
Mhm.
excited to talk about your story today. But before we dig into the juicy parts, just to give our listeners kind of the cliff notes of you, who you are, where you are, who you do life with, what your kind of high notes are.
Yeah, so my name is Jordan Grainger. I live in Seattle right now. In my corporate job, I work in marketing at a tech company, and I live with my dog. She's a Great Dane puppy, but I call her my mini Dane because she is very small for a Great Dane. And then I live with my boyfriend up here as well. And Seattle's great. We are just getting into summer, which is like the time that Seattle is great. So that's very nice. And yeah, I started posting TikToks in January when I decided to take a break from drinking, and a couple of them completely blew up. And I found an incredible community of people who felt the same way that I did around alcohol. And that's how I kind of ended up here.
Yeah, TikTok is wild, man. I was a long time lurker. Like I would just consume TikTok for a long time because I felt so intimidated by it. But then like you start making videos and you're like, oh wait, this is the easiest thing on the planet. And it's just very fun and creative. And your For You page just like gets you so accurately. And I like want
Hmm.
to know how their algorithm works because it's a little alarming. But I don't think I knew you were in Seattle. It is so beautiful there this time of year.
Yeah, it's really incredible. I graduated in the pandemic, so
Mm.
I was in LA in 2020, and then my sister and her fiance live in Hawaii, and I grew up in
Hmm.
Hawaii, and
Mm.
so we quarantined for a while in Hawaii. And my boyfriend, he was also born and raised in Hawaii,
Hmm.
and so we all quarantined in Hawaii together. So I was in Hawaii for a little bit, and then once things started, I won't say returning to normal, but
Yeah.
opening up a little bit more, I came back. And when I started work, I was based out of
Mm.
Seattle. So we came, and now I'm in Seattle, and I love it up here. It's great.
Yeah, I've got some family up there, and we always try to say, like, don't tell anyone it's actually not as rainy as they think it is.
I
Because Seattle
know.
in the spring is like it's like 70 degrees, sunny, blue skies.
Yeah.
It's so, so beautiful. Well,
Yeah.
give us the story of you and alcohol. And I'll leave that pretty open ended, but I think to preface all of this, we're here to talk about sober curiosity. So give us
Hmm.
the rundown.
Yeah. So it's honestly, I'll give you a very high level rundown because I think there's a lot that has gone into it. Like looking back in my history with alcohol, it's like definitely a long history. So starting with the fact that my mom and dad both don't drink. My mom at around my age just realized it wasn't really serving her and cut it out of her life. And on both sides of my family, there's addiction. And then my dad, he went to AA and went to rehab when my sister and I were really young. So I think he's now 30 years sober. Um, and yeah, so I grew up in an alcohol-free household, and my parents didn't drink, which I have a lot of thoughts on how that was for me, but it definitely exposed me to the possibility of being alcohol free. And I think it became a topic of conversation. Like sobriety became a topic of conversation much younger for me than I think it did for most people, because like for example, when I was in high school and I like got in trouble because I got caught drinking, um they like would bring up kind of their sobriety, and like it would be a part of the conversation. So that's how I was like first kind of exposed to sobriety. Like I just grew up around it. And then like my drinking was, I would say, well, I lived in Hawaii, which is a very small community. And anyone who's from a small town will know that I think you're exposed to things much younger than if you're like I don't know, maybe if you're living in a city, it's the same thing. But we were exposed to like alcohol and drug use much younger because the community is so small that you're hanging out with older people all the time. So like everyone, it's just kind of like like once you're like 14, like your friend group is like 14 to like 18 and whoever is around. And so I started like I had my first drink when I was like 13, which seems really young, but and it totally was. Like looking back, I'm like, wow, I was so dumb and young. But
Well, you're 13, like how
yeah,
not dumb, just
exactly.
uninformed.
Just 13.
Yeah, just 13.
Yeah. And so but it wasn't like excessive or anything. I think I had like, I probably, but between the time I was like 14 and like 17, I drank like a handful of times. And it was like very like what you would do in your teens, like sneak it out and like have like one single water bottle of vodka with your friends and like try and
Why
share
did
it
we
between
all do that? I mean, like
in
literally
some field somewhere.
the single water bottle, clear water bottle of vodka. Why?
Yeah, that I like bought from I remember this so clearly. I brought it from one of my friend's older brothers. And he gave us like a small Dasani water bottle of vodka, which I am sure he watered down, and he charged
Yeah.
us $40.
Oh
And
my
I at
God.
the time was like, of course that's what it costs. And
Yeah,
now I'm like, wait
yeah.
a second.
Like do
But
the
yeah,
math on that.
yeah. So that's how uninformed we were, clearly. And yeah, and then it was like, I don't know, it was very like typical high school situation. And then when I was in college, I think that's where it started to get really problematic. And I went to a giant party school. I went to USC. I loved my school, but I was in Greek life and it was a gigantic party school. And it's just what you did was you drank all the time. And it was like truly all the time. Like we had wine Wednesday, Thirsty Thursday. We'd have an event on Friday. We'd have game days on Saturday. Like it was constant. And it was just very unhealthy. And I think you rationalize it. And honestly, I have mixed thoughts on like if I would have done it any differently, but
Yeah.
you rationalize it because it's what everyone's doing. And I also have a lot of mental health issues. Like I struggle with depression and I have ADHD. And one of the big things for mental health is like being a strong part of a community, and my community was
Right.
Greek life and
Yeah.
they were partying. And so it was kind of this like double-edged sword of like, I know alcohol isn't helping my mental health, but I also know that isolating myself from my community won't help my mental health either. And so it was like I was aware that I was like, this isn't helping me and I'm
Yeah.
unhappy, but I don't know how to fix it.
Right. And you're
And
22. Like who does
yeah.
when they're that young?
Exactly. And it was kind of the first time I was freely exposed to alcohol because I would get in trouble, obviously, when I was in like high school, and my parents were very strict and I lived in an alcohol-free household, and like I got away with nothing. And
Yeah.
so so it was the first time I also was like, I could do whatever I wanted, and that was fun. And like, and I won't villainize alcohol. Like it was fun. And there were
Yeah.
times where it was totally fun. But it just was making me miserable, and I knew that. And so I got through college, graduated in a pandemic. And my thinking when I was in college was like, okay, I know this is bad. I know this is problematic. I know what my family history is, but I'm going to get through college and like see how I am as an adult. Like that's what I thought.
Yeah. It was a good thought.
Yeah, exactly. And so I got through college and graduated in a pandemic, which I think was so weird, especially for drinking habits, because I had nothing. Like I had no responsibility. I was just like, okay, I will say I had a very privileged quarantine situation. I was with my boyfriend, my sister, who's like my best friend, and my sister's fiance, who's my boyfriend's best friend, because he and I met through them. So we had like a really great time. And we were in Hawaii. And so like it was really nice, but it still was just like, I didn't have work yet. I didn't have school. I was really sad because of like, I was mourning the loss of college and all these things that like I like missed out on because of my second semester senior year. And like a lot of people felt, it was just kind of like, okay, I guess like we're going to make this cute cocktail I found on TikTok, and like we're going to have margaritas with dinner and we're going to have sangria because we're bored and it's something to make. And like, it's just kind of was this like constant, but it wasn't ever like problematic in the way it was in college. It's problematic in a different way. I'll say that.
Mhm.
And then it just got to the point where I was like, I am hating this. And like, I would go out with my friends once things got a little bit more normal. And I would be like, okay, I'm going to set a boundary for my own self. Like, nothing like, I want to be home by midnight. And then I just wouldn't. And it would only happen. I'm now, I guess I fast forwarded a little bit, but now I'm like working
Yeah.
and, it would only happen. I would only really have like big nights out like once a month, but every time I had a big night out once a month, it would like send me into a hangover spiral. I would like really cross my own personal boundaries. And I was just like, this is not serving me at all. So in my head, I was like very well aware of the fact that I wanted something else and I wanted a different relationship. And we can get into this more, but like my stubbornness and growing up in an alcohol-free household with the AA mindset that I was exposed to, that did not sound like what I needed and what I wanted. And so because of the knowledge that I had, I was like, well, those are the two options. You either drink or you go to AA. And like, I don't want to go to AA. That doesn't seem like what's right for me. So I'm going to keep drinking. And it just, I don't know. I was like, I can't keep doing this. So eventually I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about the book Sober Curious. And I was like, oh, that sounds exactly how I feel. And these people are talking about it in the way that I feel. And I'm talking about it or thinking about it. And like, so then I started like following content creators, and I actually followed a lot of sober content, like fully sober content creators. And I would like kind of deep stalk them, like like being the creeper on TikTok, like early TikTok times. But I never really did anything about it. I was just interesting, but their content everyone's content started to resonate with me like more and more. And I was like, oh, this is like a possibility. Like this is a thing that could be done. And there's a range, and it doesn't have to be drinker and non-drinker. It doesn't have to be like you go to AA or you keep drinking. There's kind of a spectrum, and I knew I fell somewhere in that spectrum. So I read the book Sober Curious, and I was like, yes, this is me. And then she has a 100-day Sober Curious challenge. And I had done in the past, like I had done Whole 30, and you can't drink for 30 days on Whole 30. I had done like a dry January. And so I had taken like breaks. I think the longest break I took from drinking was like 6 weeks. But I knew I needed more time than that to really understand and evaluate like the role it was playing in my life. Like I can shift my lifestyle in 30 days and like just get out the other end, and it'll be fine. Like hide from my friends basically for 30
well,
days.
Yeah, it's like you said that you were having those big nights out once a month. Like
exactly.
You can change
it's like
that.
I'll skip that one, and then I don't drink wine like on nights after work. And so I was like, I need to do something more. 6 months seemed like too much. It's my sister's wedding year. Her wedding is in a few weeks. And I was just like, okay, I'm going to do this 100 days. This is perfect. And I actually didn't tell anyone until I committed to it, because I knew I wanted it. I knew what my parents would say, which is yes, but I didn't want it to be their decision. And I knew what my boyfriend would say, which was also yes. He's very supportive of this. And I was like, this needs to be my decision. And so I literally, the day that I started, I was like, I'm taking 100 days off from drinking, like starting right now. And it was like 2 days after New Year's. And New Year's, like a lot of people are like, oh, it's because you had a crazy New Year's. And it actually wasn't. I had a really pleasant New Year's, and it was like one of those nights that I would qualify as like a good drinking night. Like I didn't have a crippling hangover. Nothing really went wrong. And for me, that was better because I didn't go into the sobriety with like the guilt associated with a specific event. There's guilt associated with a lot of events. Yeah, it was very much like I'm making this decision not based on one thing, like based on like the accumulation of a lot. So yeah, that's how I started my 100 days. And then now I just finished my 100 days a couple weeks ago, I guess. And I've done a lot since then. I went to my sister's bachelorette party. I went to Stagecoach. I went to Tulum with my family, and I barely drank at any of them. At my sister's bachelorette party, I got wine tastings, and I would sip the wine
Mm-hmm.
and then dump it in everyone else's glasses. And then in Mexico, I had a margarita. Kind of, I mean, being sober curious is like kind of about like trying and seeing where
Mm-hmm.
you fall. And so I had a margarita, and honestly, I was like, meh, could have gone without it. Like it was fine. It was like just
Mm-hmm.
as good as the mocktails I was having, and it didn't really do anything. So there's that. And then like I got a beer at Stagecoach, and then I was like, oh, this got warm really fast and I don't really want this and gave
Gross.
it to my
Yeah.
boyfriend. And so I'm at this point where I have the opportunity to drink, but I'm choosing consciously not to.
Mm.
So that's kind of where I am now. I know that was so long-winded, but
No, I
like I
like
said, it
to
was a long story.
yeah, I like to leave these open-ended because I think there's so much that goes into any version of whatever we're doing here. Because I mean, you started in your childhood and that's it. Like you were around people who didn't drink, one through the 12 steps in addiction and that side of things, and then one through a more conscious decision that like this just doesn't feel good. And like that
Mhm.
impacts everything else. You know, we have this idea of like, I don't know if this is true for you, but sometimes when my folks didn't really drink when I grew up either. My mom didn't drink because
Mhm.
it made her stomach hurt. And my dad would like drink a beer or two at night, but it like just wasn't a thing. And so for me, it was like I like ricocheted to the other side of that when I went to college. And it's like it all matters what we have seen when we were younger, what we experienced, what sort of stories we had around it, what sort of ideas and culture that has been created about alcohol in our lives, and our reaction to that idea and culture. So I always leave it open ended, and I think that it gives us so much to start with. But you know, I
Mhm.
think one of the things that drew me so much to your story and the way you talk about this is like when you share this on TikTok, like you're very frank about it. You're like, I don't know what my end goal is here. I don't know. Well, I know 100 days is my end goal, but I don't know past
Mhm.
that what this looks like for me. But I'm here to learn as much as I can. I'm here to get information and gather data and see actually how I really feel about this. And I saw the one about the wine tasting and it made me laugh because I was like, oh, if I were to take a sip of the wine, then I would drink all of the wine in the
Yeah.
whole winery. Like that wouldn't work for me. But this
Mhm.
idea of like it is a spectrum and it's we have so many different experiences with this, and there can be people in this middle area who are like, this isn't full blown addiction, but this is like, this isn't working for me. This is making me feel bad.
Mhm.
This is making me feel sluggish. I don't feel like I have control over this, all the way to, you know, people like our moms who are just like, this, I don't like this. I'm not going to do it. I'm like, cool,
Yeah.
mom. Like, that'd be neat.
Yeah.
Cool. Um,
Yeah. Well, I can actually add something to what
yeah.
you're saying. In terms of like the wine tasting, and I think the belief on addiction, I don't know enough because of my experience is limited because I'm young
Mhm.
on like
Yeah.
whether
How
or
old are
not
you for
I'm
context?
23.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm very young. So I don't know if I would say if I continued drinking on the path that I was
Mm,
on, I would have gone to a rehab facility and I would
mm,
have quit drinking in that way.
mm,
And it caveat being there is that weird time where everyone excuses behavior because you're young.
mm,
And so because I didn't, I was like, this is a problem and I need to change something. I didn't get to the point where it was like, oh, now you're older and this behavior is not appropriate anymore. So now you need help. And I think that is honestly a big part of the reason I wanted to share because it's like, I can't say like I don't think, and I don't think I come off this way, but like I don't think I'm above people with addiction. I don't think I've like beat addiction in any way. I think I was well on the way. And I think our understanding of addiction more and more is going to come out about our understanding of addiction on
yeah.
like what causes it and like there is, I mean, it is alcoholic, and alcoholism is an evolving
Mhm.
definition. Like there has
Yeah.
not been a stable definition for it. So it's like, you know, you could look at me and be like, look, dad, AA, check the box, like problematic drinking, check the box. Like I checked the boxes.
Mm,
But I think I'm at that weird point where it's like, but also I was in college and
mm,
that's just what everyone does.
yeah.
So it was interesting, and I think that that's why I share, because I'm like, I think the fact that I am changing my habits at this age is what maybe is going to prevent me from needing that type of support in the future. And maybe by sharing I can like also get other people there. But yeah, I
And
always have to put disclaimers like,
mm,
this is not this is does not support people with alcohol abuse
yeah.
disorder, and like
Mhm.
my this is my experience, and I try very hard to use like only I and me language on my posts so that
Mhm.
it's not like prescriptive to anyone else.
Mhm.
um but yeah, I think it's
But
interesting.
yeah, and so what we call that, like, in the industry is, like, we would call you an early exiter. You took the early exit. You said, "I see where this road goes. I'm gonna go this way now before I get to that point." And, I mean, I feel like every single person I know who eventually, like, fully quits drinking, like, has a rock bottom or doesn't have a rock bottom, but just had a really bad experience with it is like, "Man, I wish I had stopped earlier. I wish I had
Mhm.
put the brakes on. I wish I had looked at this differently. I wish I had experienced this differently earlier." So I think that that's one of the things that's so powerful about what you share. And to back up with the 100-day challenge and the Sober Curious book, that's Ruby
Yeah.
Warrington. For those who are
Yes.
not familiar with Ruby's work, we're actually having her on the podcast in a couple weeks.
I
So
love her.
yeah, she's wonderful. So, I think that we're getting like this whole new language around it too, because when I quit drinking in 2017, nobody was talking about sober curiosity.
Mm-mm.
There wasn't a word that anybody used. It wasn't a phrase that anybody used. And just like you said, like we understand the clinical definition of alcohol use disorder, but this idea of addiction and alcoholic and all of these labels, they're really in flux right now and are really changing our understanding of what it means, what the markers are, when you have to exit. And I think that's a big one. It's like
Mhm.
so much of what we knew about alcohol use disorder and before, when it was like more referred regularly as alcoholism, is like you get there when you hit rock bottom. Like you got to hit rock bottom so that then you can exit and then you can have this life-changing experience. But what I hear from people like you, and what was the phrase? They're calling it the damp lifestyle on TikTok too. And I'm
Yes, I've
like,
seen
this
that.
is so funny. We're like getting a whole new language because nobody on
Yeah.
sober Instagram is calling it damp lifestyle. Like that is like
Mhm.
a Gen Z thing on TikTok. So tell me about what data you gathered. What information did you gather about how you feel with it, how you feel without it?
Yeah. So, oh, that's such a good question. And I think one thing people really want all the time is for, like, I find with the way that people ask me questions is for me to tell them whether they need to stop, which I always think is funny.
Mhm.
And that reminds me of what you were saying.
Yeah,
Like, people are always wanting to understand what are the, like, what's the code
yeah,
to, like, am I an alcoholic?
yeah.
And I think
And
especially people my age.
everyone's done that Google too. Like, am I an alcoholic? And like
Yeah.
everything you find on the internet will say either yes, you absolutely are, or no, it's fine. Like
Or no,
you can
yeah,
you can
totally.
find any answer that you're looking for.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's what's so interesting. So I always say it's very personal, but
Hmm.
for me, a big, huge thing for me is mental health. And like
Hmm.
originally when I started posting on TikTok, I was going to post about mental health. But I think you can't have this conversation without talking about mental health. And I
Yeah.
couldn't have the mental health conversation without talking about the way alcohol played a role into it. And so
Mm,
it kind of ended up leaning more into alcohol. But so for me, I've had clinical depression for a very long time. I knew alcohol wasn't doing anything for my depression, and I was just getting frustrated with my mental health. And I was like, hey, I know that this is a clear thing that will happen. And then I think another one, which I mentioned earlier, is like the broken promises to myself
mm,
to any level. So I also recently quit nicotine. I was one of the Gen Z millennial generation who got sucked in by Juul and then was
mm,
addicted to nicotine that way.
Hmm.
which was a huge part of party culture at my school, and like
It's
most of my
so
friends were.
crazy to me.
Yeah, it's really horrible. And like I hate that company and I hate what they're doing,
Hmm.
because it's getting so many young people addicted who I would have never smoked a cigarette. Like
Yeah.
it's disgusting to me. And
Hmm.
it's funny, I always say I started smoking it because of one of my stupid ex-boyfriends. And I'm like,
Mm.
wow, what a like lasting thing.
Yeah. Stupid
He gave me a
ex-boyfriend.
nicotine addiction.
Ugh.
But that was a big one, was like I would quit, but then the second I had a drink, I would
Mm.
want to smoke. And
Hmm.
so that was one of the promises that I was constantly breaking to myself that I was getting very frustrated with. Another one was just like personal curfews. And I would be like, oh, I have something to do tomorrow. I don't really want to be hungover and really tired. And so I want to be home by 10:30. And then I would come home at 11:30. And like nothing was like life ruining. I think
Hmm.
the life ruining days of my drinking stayed in college.
Hmm.
Like I think there was times where I did really stupid, horrible things because I was in college,
Hmm.
and it's normalized and everyone says
Yeah.
it's fine. We all black out. Like
Right.
everyone blacks out. So I did like leave those behind, which kind of furthered this narrative in my head that like, oh, as I grow up, it's going to change.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think the promises, the mental health, and then I mean, I loved it and I hated it. And it
Hmm.
felt like a toxic relationship.
Hmm.
And I actually, Millie Gooch,
Hmm.
if
I love
you,
Millie.
I know she's awesome. So she did Sober Girl Society, and I read her book recently, and she was saying like, no, I don't miss it. It feels like a toxic ex. And I think
Yeah.
that's such a great way of talking
Yeah.
about it, and how you feel looking back at it. Like that
Hmm.
is how it feels. Like there is a pang of nostalgia for like
Hmm.
what was, but
Hmm.
you also can recognize everything that was terrible about it.
Hmm.
But that's how it felt. It was just like I loved partying. I loved getting a glass of wine after work. It's like, yeah, I'm not going to say like, oh, I was miserable the whole time and it was terrible and all things
Hmm.
were bad. But the things that I hated started to outweigh the positives, like my
Mm.
hangovers. Another thing, which I don't know, everyone says this happens with age, but I'm like, I'm still pretty young, but maybe it happens with years drinking, was my hangovers would last like multiple days. And
Mm.
so even if I had that one day a month,
Mhm.
it would last me 4 days. And my hangovers were all mental health related. So
Mm.
I would go into severe anxiety spirals. I would have major depression.
Mhm.
Like sometimes it would trickle into suicidal thoughts, and
Mm.
like it was just terrible. And
Mm.
like I would text my friends and they'd be like, yeah, everyone gets anxious. And I was like, well,
Mm.
you guys are getting out of bed. So I
Yeah.
feel like whatever is happening to you is different than what's happening to me, because
Right.
I can't even talk to my live-in boyfriend right now. Like I can't
Mm.
even look at him. I have to, and it wouldn't even be in response to like something horrible happening. It
Mhm.
just kind of became my body's default response to
Mm.
any amount of like level of binge drinking. Like it wouldn't
Mm.
happen with like 2 drinks, but if I had like 3 or more, it would be like that. And so then that was kind of the like final thing, is I was just like, I can't, I love my job too. I
Mm.
can't be miserable for half of my week. And
Yeah.
like, so that was a lot of it. And then another thing was that I wanted to do more. I really wanted to start doing entrepreneurial things. I
Mm.
wanted to start building hobbies back into my life. And I knew that the thing that was getting away of all of that was the time I spent drinking, and like
Mm.
the amount of energy I spent. Even if it was just a glass of wine, it's like, okay, I have a glass of wine after work and then that's my work. I'm not going to do
Yeah.
anything. Like, so that was kind of on the positive side of it. That was another thing that like pushed me to do this reevaluating. And then,
Mm.
yeah, I think just the more I listened to sober curious content, I was like, this is for me. Like, this
Mm.
is what I need to do.
Mm. It's so interesting. We've done, about a dozen episodes now, and I've had to put a content warning on the beginning of a very large percentage of them about suicidal thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Because and I'm started like I wish we had better data on this, but I'm starting to realize just through these conversations like how common it is to have that internal mental health internal dialogue, to have those thought processes that are so harmful and so toxic and truly dangerous because
Mhm.
of the way that alcohol starts to impact our brain chemistry and our mental health.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I love that you have been sharing on some of your TikToks is about like the neurochemistry. And I'm like, Jordan's going to change Gen Z's life because once you understand how this is working with like dopamine and all of the neurochemistry and how it impacts mental health, like once you start to know those things, you really truly can't unknow it. We can know like passively that alcohol is not good for our mental health or alcohol makes us more anxious. But when we start to connect the dots and say, this is how this is actually working in my brain, and these thoughts that I'm having are a lot more universal than I realize. It's not just me. It's not just something's wrong with me. It's like, this is a pattern that is happening to a lot of people, and it makes sense with the way it works with our neurochemistry. So what is like the response from people when you share something like that?
So I actually honestly haven't talked much about the suicidal thoughts on TikTok, mainly
Mhm.
because of the way I'm worried that TikTok's going to start banning
Yeah.
my content if
Yeah.
I do.
Right.
I've kind of hinted at
But
it.
even like the neurochemistry stuff, like what do people
Yeah,
say about that?
people are obsessed with it. Like, I think that's what people are interested in. And my therapist tells me that I am a difficult client because I over intellectualize my problems. So that's like always been a thing for me. Like,
Perfect.
I will read all of the self-help books. I want it. I'm obsessed with psych. I don't know why I didn't study psych in
Mm,
college. I want to know the inner makings of my brain because I mean, like you said, it can be life-changing. And I had depression and I had suicidal thoughts in high school. And so I think for so long it feels like personal and it feels like why like if I'm thinking this, I don't know, it's so weird. It's such a
mm.
weird thing to do. It's like, how am I feeling this way? Like, it feels like there's like a bully in your brain.
Oh yeah.
And then you learn that it's literally there's chemistry behind it. And I
Hmm.
think that is like was kind of freeing of like say with anxiety spirals, there's chemistry behind it. And so
Right.
it's like if you can rationalize it in that way, there's a level of freedom that comes with like being able to rise above those thoughts and
Mm,
those thought patterns.
hmm.
So that's how it
Hmm.
like my interest in that started. And then yeah, the video that blew up, that I think like kind of got me famous and got my content famous was me talking about the way that your body releases endorphins and dopamine and also suppresses your prefrontal cortex when you drink
Hmm.
alcohol.
Hmm.
So your like decision making is down and you're
Yep.
like riding this dopamine high
Yep.
and your body is like this is dangerous. And so it reacts by counteracting all of those
Hmm.
things, which is releasing dynorphins. And then eventually your body starts to predict the behavior and it'll just release dynorphins
Mm.
without actually, you aren't getting the extra hit of artificial dopamine through alcohol. And
Yep.
so you're just getting the depressant. And I think that's where people can get into that, which was one thing I did after work
Hmm.
wine, which is like you feel down and you just train your body that the
Yep.
fix to being down is the wine.
Hmm.
And it's all very subtle and it's very subconscious. But I do think when you have that drinking habit, if you hear the science behind it, you're like, oh yeah, that is what's happening. Like, because a lot of people say like, oh, I don't drink to suppress my depression or I don't drink
Right.
to solve my problems. Like,
Right.
that's not me.
Right.
But I think when you start pointing out how nuanced it is and how
Hmm.
tiny and subtle it is, it's not like, oh, you get in a fight with your boyfriend and you're sad, so you run to the kitchen and
Right.
chug a bottle of wine. Like, that's not what it looks like. It looks like just a subtle reaction to the changes in your body's energy.
Mm.
And like, and I think that's so happy hour, like that, there's an
Yeah.
entire
Yeah.
hour based on that. So I think it kind of, like you said, like pointed out something that people knew, but it
Mm.
like put the science behind it. And so I would say people's reactions, I mean, I try to focus on the positive. So the positive
Yeah,
people
you
like,
do exist on the internet, so
yeah. So
it's a
people
mixed
like
bag.
love it. And there's a lot of people, like, I would say a lot of people who are in college who are like, this makes so much sense.
Mm.
And who are younger, who are like, I feel this so extremely with
Mm.
the way drinking culture is, especially with like young corporate life. Like there's
Yeah.
even like once you graduate college, it's just like a lot of things center around drinking.
And it feels
in this age.
glamorous and it, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Which, yeah. And so, but the other comments I get are, one, people are like, this is obvious. And then other people are like, so am I special because my brain doesn't do this? And I'm always like, no, your brain is doing it. You're just like not feeling it the same. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
That bothers me. Like,
Yeah.
you're not special, Jan.
Yeah, literally.
So one, and I think that when you talk about the nuance, when we think about the way alcohol interacts with our bodies and we think about a physical dependence to alcohol, we picture like the dude under a bridge with the 40 in a paper bag who has to drink it in the morning to survive. And there is that. But also there are people who don't have to drink in the morning, but the evening rolls around and their body starts to give them all these signals and cues that says time to drink alcohol. Like that is a version of physical dependence because your body chemistry has changed because of regular use of this substance and training it to do so. And it's like, once you frame it that way, you're like, oh, that's really, I don't like that. That doesn't feel good to think about. But I think, and for me, I quit drinking almost 5 years ago and was like very much in alcohol use disorder. And I knew I wanted to stop and I knew I had to. And speaking of mental health, postpartum depression was my bag.
Mm-hmm.
And nothing clicked like the neuroscience clicked. When I learned how my brain was working and how it made a lot of sense that by 5 o'clock, I was so fried and I was so shot. And the only thing that was helping me was alcohol because of what I trained my body to do, because of my neurochemistry. That was like the light bulb that changed everything for me and finally got me to where I am now. And I think that it's so powerful to understand how our bodies work. And we talk about this idea of when you were younger and growing up in an alcohol-free house and the way we teach our young kids about alcohol. And I'm like, there's so much that we're missing about giving them all of the information that they need to be able to make informed choices. And of course, a 22-year-old or an 18-year-old, they don't have a fully formed brain to be able to make like fully rational adult choices. And we know that because of brain science. But even like, I think if somebody had explained it to me in this way, and I didn't have the language for mental health when I was younger, so I don't know if I would have still connected the dots or not. But just to understand like what is actually at work in my physical body, because I was just told, don't drink alcohol because you're going to get pregnant. Don't drink alcohol because you're going to get a DUI. So to think about like if we were to teach people differently when they're younger and give them all the tools they need, I don't know. So I'm like, where do you see drinking culture for young people going? Like we talk about college, this is so normalized. I'm like, that sounds just like my college experience a decade ago. Do you think that there's any change there? Do you think there's any possibility that we'll look at this differently in a decade?
Yes. And I think there is a big movement of younger people. There's an obsession with wellness culture, as we all know. And I think there's so much emphasis on health and like, you cannot really have peak health if you're drinking alcohol, like period. And even if it's a beer a week, like you are drinking a toxic chemical.
Yep.
And I think as more and more respected, because one of the other sources of information I got it from was people that I really respected on like health podcasts and information or like podcasts about like being your best self. They're like, I don't drink because X, Y, and Z. And so I was like, wow, I really respect you. And I actually want to make a TikTok about this, but I really respect you and like your belief on brain health or your belief on like wellness, and you're not drinking. So like, I like probably I shouldn't also be drinking.
Putting those dots together.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's going to come out more and more. I also think there is like, I am seeing a shift and an interest from young people of, like you said, the damp lifestyle. And it's like of people being like, can we stop pretending like this is the most important, like life-changing thing in our lives? And that's one of the things that frustrates me. So a couple things that frustrate me so much about drinking. One is, and this, I will caveat and say that obviously my dad is sober through AA,
Mhm.
and I know it's an incredible resource for a million people. I absolutely support everything they do, and I think it's amazing. However, I do challenge their beliefs a lot because
Yeah.
that's kind of what I like to do personally, is like find the different arguments to things and poke holes in things and
Mhm.
understand it better. But one of the things I think you kind of just touched on is like the more we get an understanding of how toxic and addictive alcohol as a chemical is, the more we can take the blame off the individual and put it
Yes.
back on the chemical. And I
Yes.
think that is one thing that I never resonated with the AA
Mm.
teaching, is I was like, I have enough guilt and shame in my own head.
Yeah.
Like, I don't need to go to a meeting and have other people like tell me that I'm terrible.
Yeah.
And so that was like one thing for me. But I feel like young people, the more we talk about that, the more it'll resonate with young people, because
Mm.
right now that is kind of one of the biggest resources out there is AA. And
Mhm.
so
Yeah.
if you are interested or curious and you look, you immediately get scared away.
Mm.
And the more people like me and like Millie are talking about this in this kind of like fun and colorful and welcoming way, I think the more people who would have maybe gotten deterred originally will come into the conversation. Um, but yeah, the other thing I think is like the more we learn how absolutely terrible alcohol is as a chemical, the more the culture will change. And I mean, you see a huge shift. Like for me, I'm like an aesthetic Instagram girl, like through and through. And so one of the biggest things I was like, dang, like my cute glass of wine in my pictures. Like it's like that culture is so
Yeah.
predominant, but we're getting more and more like cute non-alcoholic drink
Mhm.
choices and
Mhm.
aesthetic bars that have non-alcoholic drink menus and things
Yeah.
that make you feel like you're not missing out on anything.
Yes.
You're like actively choosing not to partake. And I think
Mhm.
that is a big thing to get young people, because
Mhm.
young people just don't want to be included and they don't
Mhm.
want to feel left out. And so not being a part of drinking culture can feel really isolating and make
Mm.
you feel really left out. And so
Mm.
I think with like the combination of those things, younger generations are going to start to pick up on like, maybe this isn't for us and maybe things will
Yeah.
change.
It's so interesting to think about Juul and vaping. And I've always said, well, I haven't always said, but I more recently have said, I think we're going to look at alcohol the way we look at cigarettes now in like hopefully a decade, maybe like
I
3
know.
decades. I don't know. But then I think about like my generation, the way we view cigarettes, like we're never going to be a part of like the vaping culture because like it so I don't know. I'm like I'm optimistic that it's going to change, but it's like, man, but then the vaping industry came and like screwed it all up. So like what's
Hmm.
big alcohol going to do next? But I think what you said about this idea of changing the onus of the problem, quote unquote, from the person to the substance is really important because, and we get this messaging all the time. We get the message of like, quote unquote, please drink responsibly, as if it's the person's responsibility to adapt
Hmm.
to a chemical substance that is highly addictive, that is a neurotoxin, that is all these things, that is the person's problem if they cannot, quote unquote, drink responsibly. But the more we know about the science of it, we're like, well, no shit, none of us can drink responsibly because like
Yeah.
this is the way this works. So I see the youths on TikTok with their damp lifestyle, and for anybody else who's like, what the fuck's a damp lifestyle? They're talking about damp lifestyle as like, you can probably speak to this better than I can, but like drinking very infrequently. Like,
Yeah.
how would you describe the damp lifestyle?
I think so. I feel like and I don't know, maybe you can speak to this a bit more, but my friends and I have talked about this of like, this is prefacing my answer, but there's a huge binge drinking culture. And
Yes.
I feel like there has been a rise in binge drinking culture. And I think like the extent to which it's appropriate to drink is very high, and it's a
Hmm.
lot, and it's almost expected that it's a lot. And like, I don't know if you've seen like the girls on TikTok who are like, oh, like I'm like a feral in the club. Like, it's just like there's
No,
like
that doesn't come up on my
that's
For
not
You
making it
page.
over to you.
Yeah, I'm more like sober cottagecore.
Yeah.
I'm on gay talk too. I'm like that's not
Yeah.
making
I
it
feel
to
like
my
we all
TikTok.
are.
Yeah.
um but yeah, so I would say, and maybe it's just the age we're in, maybe binge drinking has always been a huge thing, but I feel like there's like a huge binge drinking culture. So I think damp lifestyle is kind of the answer to that. And if I were to say there's a spectrum, I would say that sober is on one end, sober curious is in the middle, and damp is like closer to drinking, and then drinking is on the other end.
Okay.
So I think damp means like maybe drinking less frequently, like not drinking for no reason, and drinking very little when you do drink, because the norm is to drink a
Yeah.
lot when you do drink. So I think it's kind of the answer to that, and I
Hmm.
think it's great. And like,
Yeah.
I mean, the truth is, like, people, I get a lot of comments from people in the AA and the fully sober community
Hmm.
that are kind of, I think they're mad at the fact that like this wasn't a thing when they were going
Yeah.
through it, but a lot of them want to be like, well, that's great for you that you get to have this, but like that would have never
Mm.
worked for me. And like, um, and so I think there is some like frustration from that community that people are looking at the spectrum because people want it to be like black and white, and they want it to be like, I could have never been different. But I think for all of us, the more that people don't partake in drinking culture, the more that there's more likely to be a cultural shift away from drinking culture. And so that's how I feel about all of it. But yeah, I love seeing, and honestly, like, I could see that. I don't know. I think damp lifestyle is a great movement, and
Well,
important for.
and you know, this idea of like, and I get this in sober Instagram too, like there is becoming more nuance in the conversation, and the people who have always been here, the people who have always been in the recovery field have been sober. I think there's a sense of like feeling it feels threatening to their version of doing things that now there are
Yes.
other experiences out there, and I understand, and I
Mhm.
empathize that with that. Still don't like the comments that come in my DMs that tell me I'm going to kill somebody because I'm not doing it the same way as them, but
Yeah.
you know, I think that there's this, it feels threatening when there is change. But when I think about this idea of the damp lifestyle and even sober curious being its own identity, which wasn't the case 5 years ago, it's like we are starting to create more options for people other than you're a binge drinker or you go to AA. And
Mhm.
what I see this doing is when you talk about this idea of like, we have glamorized alcohol and you feel like you're missing out without it. It's like, we can glamorize like sober curious too. Like that can be really,
Mhm.
do you follow Thirsty Whale? I think is his handle on TikTok.
I haven't
Oh
seen
my
it.
God. He makes cocktails and mocktails. He partners with Ritual Zero Proof a lot, and it's
Oh,
so
cool.
funny. But the way he talks about like sometimes you just don't want to drink, and like those conversations, that's new. Like that is new, and I
Mhm.
think that's starting to shift the narrative and give people more opportunities to look at this and say, okay, maybe this isn't working for me, but maybe I don't fit over here, but
Yeah.
maybe I'm like somewhere in the middle, and like how do I make this feel good and fun and positive for
Mhm.
me? And you know, I think you and I could talk a million years about like the quote you said about like you can't have this conversation without mental health too. I think is so
Yeah.
important. And as we are focusing on mental health and that is becoming more talked about and more we're gatekeeping it less, there's less shame around it. Like I think that this
Mhm.
is all going to start to come together. But I mean, I am just fascinated by all of the things you share and the bravery, because this is a hard thing to talk about, especially when there is such black and white mindsets around this. And I feel very firmly that like the more you share about this and the more you share your experience and kind of this like opting out of what most people are doing in their early 20s, the more
Mhm.
people are going to say, oh wait, I think I could do that too. I see that as
Yeah.
an option that I didn't know before. So I feel that
Mhm.
your story is so powerful. The last question I ask every episode is if your story were to be written into a book, what would it be titled?
Oh my God. I'm like sober curious, but
Yeah,
it's already taken.
it's got a copyright.
Hmm. I would say it'd be titled Against the Grain.
I love that.
Thank you. Yeah,
I
I
love
think
that.
I am very rebellious at heart, and everything I do is like the response to people telling me I can't do it, or like or someone telling me to do something and me being like, no.
Mm,
So I think that's like, honestly, people that are like, this is not something you could talk about. I'm like, you're just
mm.
feeling me and I'm going to talk about it more.
Yeah,
Like,
totally.
thanks.
I love that. And I'm the first one to say, like, I believe that not drinking, opting out is an act of resistance. Like, that's like my rebellion. It's my rebellion
Mm-hmm.
against an oppressive system. And I'm opting out.
It
And
totally is.
we can talk about language and things like that, both the AA, like the powerlessness never reverberated with me. I'm like, no, I'm really powerful for
Yeah.
making this decision. So I love that.
Yeah.
I love the rebelliousness. I love the rebellion. But Jordan, thank you so much for your story today. Thank you for sharing this like early exiting curiosity, experimentation story, because I know there's so many people out here who are going to really resonate with this, and you will open a door for them by having shared this. I know our people are going to want to connect with you. Where can they find you? What do you have going on in your world? Tell us about your podcast.
Yeah. So I have a podcast with my best friend, and it's called Still No Plan. And it's all about trying to figure shit out in your 20s. We
Mm-hmm.
both have just felt really lost, and we've interviewed a variety of people. Sometimes it's just us, but we talk about career and mental health and just making friends in your 20s. We both live in different cities. So, like, it's just kind of really trying to figure it all out. So, yeah, that's on all podcast platforms. And on social media, it's at Still No Plan Pod. And then you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Jordan Grainger. My TikTok is where I share more of my sober content, but I'm starting to move to Instagram Reels a little bit as well. Um, and yeah, it's really fun. Give me a follow. You could DM me. I like love seeing when people have heard my content or see my content. So feel free to reach out if you heard this and resonated.
I'm laughing because I'm like, I still am going to listen to that podcast, and I'm in my 30s because I still no plan, still no plan,
I
still
know
resonates.
that's what we say.
Yeah.
We're like trying to figure out a way of saying it. Of like, it really is just like any transition time that you're feeling lost. Like, feel free to jump in.
I really looked at 32-year-olds when I was younger, and I was like, they've got their shit together. And now I'm 32, and I'm like, nope, still no plan, still just figuring it out. But
yeah.
All right,
Totally.
Jordan. Well, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate you joining us here on the podcast. And y'all go check out Jordan's content. Her TikTok's fantastic. That's how I found her.
Thank you so much. This has been amazing.